Hot Water History, episode 176, Thursday night, Juneteenth. Richard, how'd you celebrate?
I celebrated by trying to imagine a world in which I don't have to think about or feel compelled to acknowledge Juneteenth and other made-up holidays.
It's been a little while since we've talked. What's been
Yeah.
going on?
Well, you've been having some, well, you've been busy in your own life and both professionally and then in terms of flying around the country, taking in friends' weddings and stuff of that nature. And then, uh, other than I'm just waiting for your return. Can't do this without you. So,
I don't know if I ever told you this. Did I tell you about the Park Ridge story?
no.
Okay, listen to this because I have a feeling it might be a listener. Okay.
Hmm.
So we go to the same church. We've talked about it on here. We love it. Same area of perpetual help. And Father Tom, after Mass, told me one of your friends was here at the 8:30. And I said, "Do you know who? Did you get a name?" And I told him a name, and he said, "I think it was that name, but it ended up not being that name."
Okay.
Okay. So let's just say Mike. Was it Mike? I think it might have been Mike. It wasn't Mike.
Hmm.
But he said he was from Park Ridge. I still have no idea who this is. And it's a mystery that I've been on now to find somebody that knows me from Park Ridge that was at St. Mary's at the 8:30, and
Yeah.
I want to know pretty badly because not everyone takes me up on coming to church
Right.
or checking it out for themselves. So I want to know. So I'm on a bit of a witch hunt right now.
Yeah,
But
if you're
not
the
that's a
person
that's not the right
implicated,
term. Yeah. Yeah.
please message Charlie
Right.
at ChuckWest20 on Twitter.
Yeah. Well, a lot's been going on in the world. I know you want to talk
Yes.
about.
Hmm. World a World War III entry point has erupted and opened up. Even more significant, one could say, in terms of the prospects or the slippery slope in which it could slide into a greater conflagration than even the Russian-Ukraine disastrous war that's been going on for several years now. And the big story of this week was not just even the the bombing campaign initiated by a hyper-aggressive Zionist apartheid state in the case of Israel against Iran. No, excuse me, but also the very event of having a neocon Texas Republican senator and Ted Cruz be interviewed by Tucker Carlson and a reformed Tucker Carlson, a Tucker Carlson that has undergone a significant conversion and metanoia, especially on the topic of foreign policy and U.S. foreign interventionism. So the takeaways from this interview, it was set out in little snippets on social media, and I was just flabbergasted by a number of things, ranging from Ted Cruz's general ignorance of geometrics and demographics or the cost, the prospect of war with Iran when if the United States gets directly involved, which for all intents and purposes it already has been. As I stated so many times within our history courses, both those that you were able to attend in your time and then prior to and then subsequent to that, is that you can't, as the United States has done in almost perpetuity before and then during and then after World War II, American foreign policy seems to have this erroneous idea that you can support militarily by providing aid, war materiel to one side of a conflict, and then still declare yourself neutral in the conflict. It's, excuse me, it's akin to if Analogously, I walked into a hallway in a school as I was a teacher, and I see two students get into a fist fight. And I stop it, I break it up, and I say, "You should really stop fighting." And then I hand one of the combatants, which is still enraged because of the conflict, a knife. No one would declare me to be impartial or neutral at that point. And yet we have this false proposition, I suppose, of the propositional nation of the United States that the United States could just get away with just that. Meanwhile, any other nation that allies with a perceived, although almost always just made up and artificially constructed adversary of the United States, well, that nation, whether it's because of the Bush doctrine or just the idea of enemy alliances that extend from the Cold War, well, that nation's our enemy then. Uh, and yet we expect adversarial nations on the other side of the ledger, on the other side of the table, to say, oh, well, just because you as the United States are funneling billions in and helping with targeting systems and they actually have boots on the ground in Ukraine, well, you're not really at war with us, right? We're supposed to have Vladimir Putin and the Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran say, oh, well, the United States is not directly involved. So how can we should be reticent to declare the United States to be the great Satan as we've done since 1979. So the Cruz Tucker Carlson interview, and I listened to it its entirety today as it was released, and I took extensive notes, which we'll go through in a moment. Was just really so revelatory and demonstrated just how well ignorant, to be sure, as I said before, but misled, propagandized, and in a religious type of beyond ideological sense. Many of those people who have the neocons who have been pining for war and saying in almost full-throated support of John McCain when he said bomb, 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 bomb Iran. Well, that evil son of a bitch and uh his the ghost of John McCain is sure having its way now. And I don't know, and we'll get into this just in a moment as I provide my analysis of the interview. Tucker Carlson, I mean, he did a wonderful job in pressing the illogic and the real just false narrative that Ted Cruz has constructed, whether it was historical or a kind of logical progression that just ends up being this meandering and circular series of logical fallacies that we're supposed to, at the end, conclude that, of course, we should be the foremost defenders of this Jewish Zionist apartheid state whose very existence would not persist without American direct support, defense wise and other economic, whatever. Uh, I'm left just astounded that these people are such low IQ individuals who it must be frustrating or taxing to have this charade that you have to constantly present yourself as superior and naturally elite whenever you're just pressed to display some bona fide intelligence and you come up with nothing except diatribes and ad hominem attacks against your interviewer. So let me proceed to talk about. And now I know you didn't see the entire interview, so that in a way is going to be advantageous to us because as I go through my points, I hope you'll ask me to explain, and we'll include some snippets of both the interview as we go along and some ancillary, although connected material from years ago that really help to frame and I would suggest convince people that the real allegiance of Ted Cruz and the Lindsey Grahams of the world and these just absolute cuck to Israel Republican senators is not to the United States, but to a foreign country. So let me start with this. Tucker cedes too much ground. That's one point that a lot of the commentators on the interview have not brought up yet. is that, for example, he gives into Ted Cruz when he provides this false dichotomy that basically there are two groups of American contributors and thinkers in determining American foreign policy. The first of which are the interventionists, and then the other ones are the isolationists. And can I pause here? Can you tell me again why there are there's just these bromides that act as spells I'm sure the CIA is engaged in implanting in the consciousness of Americans and then gets gets the politicians in Washington all honeypotted to repeat and support. But one of them is, what is wrong with isolationism? I mean, right away Tucker goes, "Well, I'm not an isolationist. You're just calling me names. I'm not an isolationist." And then Tucker goes into, "Well, why didn't you?" Upon the revelation that Ted Cruz keeps arguing that, and this is yet to be proven, it's only just the speculation and unfounded, by the way, of the national intelligence community that's briefing the senators that there are open assassination groups and plots against Donald Trump. Okay, and Tucker gratefully he pressed him on this. Well, where's the evidence for that? Where have the arrests been made and the like? But what? And then Tucker responds, "Well, if you were sitting on that information, why didn't you act more aggressively toward Iran?" And this is a tweet that I wrote. It's a good point in the sense that Ted Cruz is so beholden to Israel and to Likud and to Bibi Netanyahu, who he calls his close personal friend, that as enraged as he is that there are Iranian networks out there, which he calls inferior and not very good at what they do, thankfully, but where this would be a casus belli, a cause for war between the United States and Iran, only then he becomes, and it's only at the point where Bibi Netanyahu and his murderous clan of sycophants and apartheid fascists in Israel, when they decide to bomb Iran, that's when he becomes animated about the assassination attempts of Trump, against Trump. But again, we, I shouldn't say we, the United States has historically flourished and prospered when its foreign policy has been described, albeit in a pejorative sense, by major American historians like David Kennedy and Elizabeth Cohen and Doris Kearns Goodwin as amateurish, sophomoric, not advanced.
Yeah.
Those are all good things because that a foreign policy that is trapped in an adolescent or sophomoric or juvenile stage and is not and a country that doesn't have a behemoth of a diplomatic corps and State Department and espionage apparatus and network. Well, that means it is focused not on the monsters abroad that are just conjured up and foreign intrigues, as Washington himself said way back in 1797. I'm sorry, in when did he leave office? 1797. So, but rather, it's focused on its own elevation, its own progress, and the periods wherein that has been the focus, and not as John Quincy Adams said, conjuring up monsters to go out and seek and destroy abroad. Well, that's when prosperity has reigned, and that's where a type of healthy American culture has flourished to make it a destination for immigrant groups or refugees that are desirous of economic advancement in their own lives. So that should be a comment. Well, again, these words that are meant to hit at the so-called American consciousness and how, of course, with Reagan, we're supposed to have a foreign policy of peace through strength. What about John Tyler or Grover Cleveland intimated to the rest of the world that we were going to engage in advantage, well, what would be the word? Sort of mono-viewed, maniacal, to be sure, foreign policy that was so tunnel vision that it would just be to the advantage of the United States rather than engaging in with other nations for mutual benefit exchange, right?
Right.
And it's in those eras away from the Lincolnian nationalism that has so dominated and persisted in American history to this day that the country's in a decline. To Tucker's credit, he kept saying to Ted Cruz, "Why are we so fixated on the situation of other countries, the prosperity, the general well-being and health of other countries, when we, on his way to do the interview in the Senate building, we have just homeless and our just littered throughout our streets, and immense wealth disparities starting to further erupt on the scene, a dwindling middle class, um, and all of the significant crises that are domestic in their nature, and yet these, what would be the word? Just egotistical and megalomaniac senators and representatives can't help but just lap up foreign, or they just can't wait to get the next foreign leader to get to address them in Congress, to dole out other people's money to them. So let's see. I already started off with that's all. I'm still on my first card, Charlie. So I
Yeah.
have a
Okay.
number of cards here. Uh, the second thing that Tucker ceded too much ground on was that Ted Cruz makes this point. He says any country shouting death to America would be better if there were would it be better if there were to be regime change? So basically Ted Cruz makes this argument that look at the Iranians are evil because this is Ted Cruz speaking, because I'm an American first, like Donald Trump. I'm an American first advocate. And isn't it just simple calculation that any regime that gets its people so riled up so as to shout death to America and call America the greatest Satan. Wouldn't it be better if there was regime change there? Well, wait a second. Because of the exploits of and disasters of American foreign policy over the past, let's call it since the Spanish-American War in 1898. And the historian Stephen Pinker or Pinzer has a great book called The True Flag about how it was really the Spanish-American War and then World War One and then World War Two that enshrined the American empire. That is our Julius Caesar moment, wherein the transition was completed from republic to empire. And ever since then, we've been in essentially a nationalistic state of constant emergency because after one foreign intervention causes all these problems that are never solved, it becomes just like public choice theory in the domestic sphere. Well, then we're hunting after more ghosts created as offspring of that initial foray. And all these little fires are never extinguished. In fact, the deep state and foreign policy apparatus doesn't want them extinguished. They want them to continue to, especially when it's advantageous and helpful to them and their own continuance in their positions, to foment and continue to rage. So he said this whole claim that we should want don't we want regime change for every regime that's shouting death to America? Well, it's totally inconsistent. I mean, just think, what was it, 2 months ago? Ted Cruz's own birthplace of Canada elected a prime minister largely on anti-American sentiment. There's no way Mark Carney does not get elected over Pierre Poilievre unless, of course, Trump does this. Obviously, Trump fomented it, but and stoked it, but it was anti-American sentiment among the boomer Canadians. Polls showed, exit polls in particular, that carried the day for the Liberals. I think about after the disastrous tenure of Justin Trudeau, Canada, with its shrinking economy and massive domestic problems, elected his successor in a sense, all based on really anti-American sentiment. Let's go for regime change in Canada? I mean, what about North Korea? North Korea was identified by George Bush way back in 2001 as one of the three nations of the axis of evil. Well, why aren't we moving toward regime change? And in fact, Ted Cruz I remember, applauded President Trump in his first term for engaging with Kim and the North Korean dictators or the dictator class. So, and autocrats. Well, it seems to me that if you look at it from another perspective, all of Ted Cruz's arguments actually are the most compelling to the conclusion that Iran should get a nuclear weapon because he doesn't want regime change in Russia. He doesn't argue for regime change in China because that's too dangerous and perilous for the United States. He doesn't want it in North Korea, right? And he doesn't want it in Canada, even though all of those could be argued to be, well, antagonistic to various degrees toward the United States. Yeah. Well, why doesn't he want that? Because all of those nations, excluding Canada, I suppose, have nuclear weapons. Notice he doesn't want, as you could show, as I sent you that one clip, he doesn't want regime change in Pakistan, even though Pakistanis are routinely out shouting death to America, right on Iran's border, by the way. And this is a picture, albeit from 10 or sorry, 12 years ago, but there's a bunch of Pakistanis. Guess what? In response to American drone strikes under Obama, out there burning the American flag. Well, where is it that Ted Cruz has called for regime change in Pakistan? It's not there. Why? Because they're not the boogeyman. They're not the bugaboo. They're not the main target of Israel. Neocon boomers like Ted Cruz, for them, history always begins at some conveniently arbitrary place, too. And this was so frustrating to me, knowing the history of American Iranian, British Iranian, Israeli Iranian relations over the course of the 20th and 21st centuries. So, for example, for Ted Cruz, vis-a-vis Iran, it's not even in 1979 when the history starts with the Islamic Revolution. It's once Israel shifted from being an adversary toward the Gulf states, which it was in the 60s, really 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, to switching to making Iran and Shia Iran its primary enemy in this perpetual war. By the way, it should be noted that given the nature of the founding of the state of Israel in 1946 through 48 and beyond in the early years, whether we're talking about David Ben-Gurion or before him Theodor Herzl and the author of Der Judenstaat and the whole Zionist experiment, they knew and still preach that because of the beginning of the modern state of Israel, that Israel, if it was to be identified as such, will be in a perpetual state of war against its adversaries. It's as though they're constantly at war with the ancient Canaanites. There's just, and other neighboring tribes. The other neighboring tribes are always out there. They're always seeking to drive them into the sea. So if you want to live in Israel, you want to be a true Israeli, prepare to be at war throughout your life. It's almost as though peace and reconciliation or mutual cooperation with uh, at least some neighbors in the area is is excluded. It's not a possibility if you're to be a member of the Israeli state or a participant in it. So that's where it begins for him. And there's no point at which Ted Cruz has either been challenged on this notion or had his history informed. That again, and Thad Russell had a great show last night, and he was talking about how, look, if you really want to get to the bottom of and to the core of why there's such enmity between Israel and Iran, you have to realize that that wasn't always the case. That, and my personal, in fact, Iran and Israel were nearly, we could consider them allies in the opening decades of Israeli existence. Iran didn't declare war in the Arab-Israeli conflict in the succession of wars, whether they were Yom Kippur or the 1973 Arab-Israeli War. It was the neighboring Arab states, you see? And yet, by the late 70s, in part perhaps because of the revolution, but I think it goes deeper than that. And that is, my theory here is that once the petrodollar was established, the petrodollar relationship was established between Saudi Arabia and the United States, and that's again requires the dollar to be pegged to petroleum export sales in
Yep.
Saudi Arabia. And then the Saudis get massive benefits from that. They get add-ons and the ability to purchase treasuries before they hit the market and all those things that are detailed in my Kish Me Once, Kish Me Twice, uh, Kish Me Deadly, which is about the Iranian island of Kish. We can get back to that. And the petrodollar arrangement, which I'll include in the show notes. But basically, look at once that was cemented and it went on beyond the first 5, 6, 7 years after Nixon establishes it, that Israel shifted. And because it depended so much on American foreign aid and protection, and yet the American dollar system and reserve currency system, especially after Nixon took the dollar uh, off the gold peg in August of 1971. Well, once the Israelis realized that there was a much more permanent economic relationship, they shifted their enmity to Iran, Shia Iran, which was always the adversary of the Gulf states, the Sunni Gulf states. That people have even Thad admitted he's like, yeah, last night he's like, I don't know why that shifted. I have to study that more, but that's my theory. It just seems to coincide. Okay. Any questions so far?
No, this is great.
Okay. Ted Cruz is an Israeli maximalist. There is no outcome. What is an Israeli maximalist in my conception of it? Well, or of him. For Ted Cruz, there obviously, as you look through the and watch the interview, there's no outcome that is positive for Israel, as defined by the Likud Party and Bibi Netanyahu, that is not positive for the United States. In other words, you might recall what I'm getting at here is Ben Shapiro's conception of what he values about the United States is also Ted Cruz's. So you don't have to go looking very far or searching in Twitter to find from circa 2012 Ben Shapiro tweeting famously that the the thing about America that makes him most proud to be American is its dogged support for Israel. That's a very odd thing for a supposedly patriotic American to do. I wouldn't expect another who what foreign national would you expect to say that in the reciprocation toward the United States? In other words, the thing that makes me most proud to be Senegalese is the fact that Senegal supports continual inclusion into the French uh, economic relationship. Right? Like, what? That's insane. Why would you would not be any longer a Senegalese nationalist by any stretch of the imagination or a
Right.
patriot? Yes. Well, that's Ted Cruz in a nutshell. The reciprocal, I was speaking about reciprocals, that's not true, however. So, in other words, what's apparent, and I'm not even getting into the USS Liberty attack or the now by this point, we're getting into the hundreds of billions of dollars, especially when we're talking about inflation adjusted value of aid the United States taxpayer has given over to this religious, racial, Jewish apartheid state that was created by a bunch of military gangs that harassed and killed and raped and pillaged its way through British Palestine. Well, what from the Israeli perspective, and you see it even, it's certainly in the case of 9/11. When something bad happens in the United States, domestic or foreign affairs and interactions, that always twists into something that's good for Israel, right? So 9/11 hits. Well, the Israeli lobby goes into fierce action, not even talking about the dancing Israelis, not talking about the supposed numbers of Jewish workers at the World Trade Center that conveniently missed that day, not talk about the Jewish real estate magnate who bought the Twin Towers before months beforehand, right, and took out an enormous insurance policy on them, or Building 7, not getting into any of that, but just the general that in a supposed attack by Al Qaeda, which was being harbored by the Taliban in Afghanistan, the Israeli lobby was able to quickly turn and mutate because so many of their, well, those on the payroll were in the Bush administration, that a preemptive and aggressive regime change war should be launched in Iraq. all to the disintegration of the Middle East, the Islamic Middle East, so that Israel might feel more comfortable in the midst of all of that division, yeah, and chaos that resulted. Um, it's at this point, I was talking when Tucker was interviewing Ted Cruz, and it dawned on me that he's an Israeli maximalist. That this isn't the first time that I bumped into Ted Cruz stating his allegiance more for the Jews of Israel than certainly fellow Americans, but even other Christians. So I was able to pull up this clip. Charlie, let's go ahead and play that. What do you think?
Those who hate Israel hate America. My heart weeps that the men and women here will not stand in solidarity with Jews and Christians alike who are persecuted by radicals.
Please respect for dialogue. Respect, please. Okay. We're in America.
If you will not stand with Israel and the Jews, then I will not stand with you. Thank you, and God bless you.
So there you go. I mean, he's booed off the stage in a meeting of fellow Christians from the Middle East. Now, you could say that he's a kooky Protestant. And as Timothy Gordon says, what is Protestantism? It's warm Jesus feelings most of the time with some Trinitarian dogma. And then the rest of it is mishmash crap and self-congratulatory and self-elevating to an authority beyond anything that the Holy Spirit would condone of each individual Protestant. It's a kind of megalomania faith. So those men who booed him off the stage were apostolic, high church men with their own, yes, some of them were Eastern Orthodox, so they have autocephalous churches and the like, but these are hardcore Christians in the Holy Land. And when he states his unequivocal support for the state of Israel, they are the ones who are living under the yoke of that oppression as Christians in the Holy Land, and they boo him off the stage. And then he just shrinks away and has no argument for them. Yeah. It's almost as though, with the famous Douglas Murray and Dave Smith debate, this has been one time where I would almost support the Douglas Murray. Well, have you been to Iran? Have you been to Gaza? Have you been to Israel? Well, you would wonder if in that sense, because he's talking about, and they're obviously relating their frustration because of the reality on the ground in the Middle East and in the Holy Land. It would have been helpful to someone say, have you even seen what Israel does or how it approaches Christians? How the Jews are constantly harassing Christians who live in the Holy Land? How the United States carrying out these regime change and absurdly, yes, unending, but counterintuitive wars, except if you're from the status of the Israelis, where the CIA is siding with one and the Defense Department is siding with another, for example, in Iraq War III, as Scott Horton tells us. Yeah. Well, if that doesn't make any sense unless you're just from the Israeli perspective that, oh, the United States is going to be engaged here for our protection forever and to our own advantage.
If you don't stand with them, I won't stand with you.
Yes. He's saying that to fellow Christians.
Goodbye.
Yeah, goodbye. So you can't get more of a Zionist, Jewish, Israeli maximalist than that. Ted Cruz actually believes that a shooting war with the Soviet Union and China would have been a disaster. Okay. But with Iran, it would be advantageous. So he stated this contention over and over again because, again, we have to protect Israel. It's our foremost ally in the Middle East. And this points just to me that he's making the case over and over again that Iran, this is the reason Iran should have a nuclear weapon. Because then no one would mess with it. Yeah. And you had even these neocons saying that the real problem in the Ukraine-Russian war, the one that allowed for it to take place and transpire, was because, well, the Ukraine didn't have a nuclear weapon. Well, you can't have it both ways. If the Russian-Ukraine war wouldn't have happened because Ukraine possessed nuclear weapons, then if Iran possessed nuclear weapons, you don't have this war. At least you could understand the Ayatollah's desire, even though again and again they've said, and our own National Intelligence Director Tulsi Gabbard said just several months ago that they're not in pursuit, nor do they have an active program for weaponizing their uranium supply. Um, we already looked at the Pakistanis burning the flag and shouting "Death to America." All right, number 5. Ted Cruz uses dumb, old, boomer Lincolnian nationalism to excuse or confuse the pro-empire, pro-Israel foreign policy, and then argues for Greater Washington to do more domestically in cities, for example, but allows and then blames the condition on the Democrats. So it's this weird meandering part in the interview where Tucker says, look, my primary objective here is to understand from your, and he keeps saying it's a sincere perspective, why we have to be constantly spending blood and treasure and energy on foreign adventurism when that money and those resources could be used either to reduce the taxation or inflationary monetary burden and fiscal situation of the United States at home so as to ameliorate the condition of Americans here. Why don't we do that? Why don't we shift our focus? And so Ted Cruz goes, well, I wish the Congress would. Well, you're in Congress. How many bills have you brought to the floor to have the federal government do something to, for example, criminalize sanctuary city policy or criminalize the rampant corruption that persists in most U.S. cities, which are almost univocally run by Democratic criminal machine organizations? Zero. There's nothing there because it's politically helpful to Republicans. They can point to look at the crumbling city, look at the rioting, look at what happens when we have open border policy in sanctuary cities. You don't want your state to look like that. Well, vote for me. I'll make sure that I get to Congress and do nothing about it and worry about Tel Aviv and sending enough Iron Dome weaponry and then like to a foreign state. Let's see. Oh, he has this weird counterfactual here. You'll love this. He says, if we don't maintain a close multi-billion-dollar subsidized relationship with Israel, he says that it was from $3 to $8 billion that we give to Israel per year. Okay. We'd spend much more. This is Ted Cruz's assertion. We'd spend much more on national security. Really, that's just a counterfactual. Who's to say that once we stop aid to Israel, which, by the way, what Israeli action, the genocide in Gaza, the failures of October 7th, right? What in the past decades of Israeli history has pointed to, in any of their actions, foreign or domestic, that our foreign policy, we're safer and more secure because we're allies with Israel. No, the exact opposite is true. Americans are endangered, both our military in foreign bases, all 790 something of them, around the world. They're the ones who are sitting ducks out there because of American adventurism and imperialism. In large part in the Middle East, it's all to help and defend Israel. Why is it? And you could just recall, I mean, it made me recollect, we're going back years and years, but right about the time when you were born, Charlie, in 2000, just before that, people forget this, George W. Bush campaigned in the 2000 election to withdraw from the region, to have less direct influence in the Middle East.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And shortly thereafter, of course, there's 9/11, and then sure enough, Israel gets what it wants all along, right? As does the perpetual military industrial complex here. Okay. He says Israel's enemy, this is Ted Cruz's justification for that position. He says, why are Israel enemies all America's enemies? Right? He says there's a direct correlation that Israel's enemies all end up being our enemies. But he never even thinks about asking why. Why is there such a strict correlation there? Why is it? Is it because the general population of the United States is so focused on protecting this rogue, fascist, largely socialist Jewish ethno state, apartheid state, that we're willing to piss off the rest of the world and thus endanger our security, right? That's the mode of thought, the consciousness, if you will, of Americans. It might be the consciousness of Ben Shapiro and John McCain and Lindsey Graham and Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. It might that might be their consciousness, but certainly isn't the consciousness of Brian and Jane in Des Moines, Iowa, or in Lincoln, Nebraska. Yeah. So enough with this. In other words, ask the cause. Is it simply just that the United States is a puppet state? Imagine the absurdity too. How would those Americans who I just mentioned, the John and Jane Does in the Midwest, react to the United States, not a caricature really, being the puppet and Israel the puppet master? That's what's really at play here. Okay. Stop me if I'm getting too much on a roll or I'm getting too heated. Okay. So there's a whole host of logical fallacies that he trots out throughout the interview. There's sense referent fallacies. There's logical fallacies related to, for example, an appeal to tradition. Well, it's always been the case that Israel is America's foremost ally in the Middle East, so it always should be. That's the way it ought to be. That's just argumentum ad antiquitam. Then you have all these like name concept fallacies. Like, so for example, he says, right, the clip that we're going to play now that I sent to you, which was the most ridiculous part of perhaps the whole thing, is when he goes on to say that Israel, the modern state, the 20th century artificial construction of Israel, is absolutely the same as the chosen people of Israel from the Old Testament, right? It's weird because, in Catholic circles, Catholic theological circles, and Christian theological circles, we talk a lot about supersessionism and dispensationalism, about, well, are we to treat the Jews as the continued chosen people, or is the new Israel the church? It's pretty emphatic in Catholic theology throughout its history that it's the latter, not the former. You see? So that's the argument, and that's been the constant teaching tradition of the church. So to see Ted Cruz not even have that come up on his radar, it's not about dispensationalism. For him, I would love to understand or have a question to Ted Cruz, and he might just say this is internal forum and none of your business. But why is he a Christian? I don't quite understand it. Because aside from his identification of being a Christian and that the foremost mission of the Christian is to protect the Jews, why be a Christian?
Votes.
Okay, sure. Okay, that's a good reason. That's a good reason. All right. We'll go ahead and play this segment from the interview.
Growing up in Sunday school, I was taught from the Bible, those who bless Israel will be blessed, and those who curse Israel will be cursed. And from my perspective, I want to be on the blessing side of things.
Of those who bless the government of Israel?
Those who bless Israel is what it says. It doesn't say the government of it, says the nation of Israel. So that's in the Bible. As a Christian, I believe that.
Where is that?
I can find it to you. I don't have the scripture off the tip of my. You pull out the phone and use the Google.
It's in Genesis. But so you're quoting a Bible phrase. You don't have context for it. And you don't know where in the Bible it is, but that's like your theology. I'm confused. What does that even mean?
Tucker.
I'm a Christian. I want to know what you're talking about.
Okay. Where does my support for Israel come from? Number one, because biblically we're commanded to support Israel. But number two,
hold on.
I'm not holding on.
Hold on. You're a senator, and now you're throwing out theology, and I am a Christian, and I am allowed to weigh in on this. We are commanded as Christians to support the government of Israel?
We are commanded to support Israel.
Votes.
Votes?
That's it.
Yes.
You need votes. You're
Right.
in Texas. You're not.
Well, it's remarkable too because the the U.S. president that in his personal background was most Zionistic in his outlook and even his policies, to the point where his mother and close relatives belong to what we might term as underground Jewish Christian aid societies, was Lyndon Baines Johnson from the state of Texas. And I wonder there's nothing that truly differentiates Ted Cruz's foreign policy from Lyndon Baines Johnson's vis-a-vis Israel. I mean, he's just that obsessed with it. He's just that obsessed with it. And then, of course, the whole the whole idea that he's equating the modern state of Israel with the Israel today. Dave DeCamp, I think I sent you the tweet. Dave DeCamp said there was a great tweet from antiwar.com, the great writer at antiwar.com. He said, "Okay, so according to this logic, if I name my firstborn child Jesus, then you should all worship him because after all, I'm just claiming that he's Jesus."
Right.
Again, sense referent and the like. But it's ridiculous. Or in what way, shape, or form is this invasionary colonial state of modern Israel made up primarily of Eastern European descendants of the Ashkenazi who converted in the 7th, 6th, and 7th centuries in Eastern Europe? They're not even original Semitic Jews who dominate the population of Israel today. How is that the chosen people from the time of Moses? Right? And then he has this weird thing where he trots out Genesis 16 and says, well, it says you're to bless Israel. God says bless Israel and not to curse, and he who curses Israel is
I want to
dead.
be on the blessing side.
I want to be what is that? That's a fourth, that's a kindergartner would say, well, wait, that I don't know. Right? Wouldn't a
That one
kindergartner
was
have
bad.
figured
That's
out
the
that?
worst. That's the worst one. That's up there with the worst. I used to do a cold takes on religion
Mhm.
tweet series. I should
Okay.
add this one to it.
Yeah.
That's probably the worst one.
Oh, sure. I mean, unbelievable. Let me go through. Oh, yes. So I love Tucker Carlson responded. So God tells you to support the modern state of Israel. And Ted Cruz's response was, the reason is that Israel is our greatest ally in the Middle East. Wait, what? The reason is that Israel is our greatest ally in the Middle East. What are you talking about? Talk about circular logic. Because Israel is our greatest ally in the East, in the Middle East, that's proof somehow that they're still the representatives of the chosen people in the Abrahamic covenant, dating back from Genesis onward. Okay. Uh oh, this is huge. We referred to this earlier. On the supposed Iranian-backed assassination attempts, I tweeted something about this, but I could summarize that here. The first of which he says there's been several attempts. And by the way, Bibi Netanyahu, oh, he just misspoke when he said the two attempts related to Butler, Pennsylvania, and then the one at I think it was in New Jersey or Florida, whatever it was, that those were Iranian backed. But he just misspoke, right? Okay, so what's more likely, right? That there are bands of Iranian rogue actors, or maybe not even rogue actors, they're just being commissioned by the Ayatollahs to go and kill Trump, operative in the United States, even though no arrests have been made or anything like that. Or that the Mossad fed the CIA with this great story to justify continual American intervention in the Middle East. Which one do you think is a little bit more likely,
Yeah.
right? Why did Cruz, and then finally, here's the thing. Why did Cruz, if he admits, as he does in the interview, he has this information about these Iranian assassination groups, right? Cells, let's call them, operative in the United States. Why do you sit for this on this for so long, right? Only to be animated, only to animate this point when Bibi Netanyahu, his real puppeteer, launches strikes into Iran. It's to justify them to your, MAGA person. All right, here's my last card. Ready?
Yeah.
All this amounts to is a mess of unrelenting false assertions, false narratives, based on ahistorical or scanty evidence, which forms the basic conclusion, still illogically reached, that aggression against Iran is warranted because it's commanded to us by God to protect the Jews. That's what the whole thing amounts to. And Cruz could say all he wants that, well, in my personal opinion, this is what forms my personal consciousness, but his policies are not representative of the general will of the American people. They are reflective of, in fact, defined by his personal feelings, sentiments, loyalties with the state of Israel. And these wildly stupid and incoherent theological assertions. That's it. And then finally, they get into the Ukraine war, and Tucker asks him to apologize for the disaster of him supporting this war. And he gets Cruz to say, well, I only voted for $80 billion in aid to Ukraine. And it just has this worldview of everyone's out to get the United States. And I wish Ron Paul was in the room, and he could just say, do you ever ask why? Why is it that when in the aftermath of World War One, in areas like Syria and the rest of the Levant, in Egypt, in Iran, the United States before the 1953 coup, Americans were seen by the Iranians as almost the Iranians loved the Americans because they had heard that the Americans were once part of the British Empire, and they fought a revolutionary war against the British because the Iranians hated the British so much because the British were, as I relate in that episode we did on All the Shaw's Men, um, the book that I read on who's the author of that? I forgot who it was. It's on the tip of my tongue. But anyway, All the Shaw's Men. Well, we had this really, the United States was seen as a great light to the world, at least one that would be against British imperialism. And basically, all the British were doing were just engaging in gross misconduct and treating the Iranians essentially as slaves to extract wealth, petroleum from and natural resources from Iran. And then we squandered that within the Middle East with all these interventions, including the 53 coup against Mossadegh. Uh, Carter's continued loyal support of the Shah well past his effectiveness. I mean, and constant aid to Israel. There you go, Charlie.
Good work. I'm caught up. I'm up to
Okay.
speed.
Okay.
It was a lot of stuff I already knew,
Yeah.
though,
Yeah. I
which
didn't think anything was going to be shocking, but just the tone and the falsehoods upon which he relies to form his worldviews are just astounding. They're immense.
it's really bad if you can't differentiate the Israels and you have that much power over all of our lives, really, and influence
Yeah, that's right.
with that.
Yeah.
But
Dave Smith's gotten in a lot of heat because he's called for the impeachment of Trump over the war with Iran. I couldn't support him anymore than that. I think this is a guy, Dave Smith. Dave is just on the right side of all of these consequential issues over the past greater 2 decades now, ever since his conversion to libertarianism and anti-interventionism. So I guess what I'm getting at is that if you're a Texas voter, how could you ever support or someone who's going to give money to any kind of a national campaign from Texas? How could you support Ted Cruz? I mean it's an impeachable offense, his positions here.
yeah, that was good work. Do you want to
Okay.
talk about a town that probably not too many people can differentiate the two Israels either?
Let's do it.
Here it is.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
Should we go to your gay suburb now?
The People segment, Meanwhile in Oak Park, brought to you by Tridentine Brewing.
That's not Oak Park. That's still Pakistan.
Yeah.
But one
That was-
day, Oak Park will look like Karachi, and people will wonder why.
Let's start with the sad one first. Final Mass Sunday at St. Catherine, St. Lucie. Rising costs, dwindling attendance leads to church closure.
And
My
here's
goodness.
a shock. The parish is a TLM traditional parish. No, it's not.
The date was nebulous when the announcement came March 2nd. We talked about this, that St. Catherine of Siena, St. Lucie Catholic Church would be closing, though it would be happening sometime in June.
What kind of sentence is that? The closing date was nebulous, not the announcement. That was on
There-
that was on March 2nd. Anyway,
There is now a final mass date, 10 a.m. Sunday at the Venerable Church at 27 Washington Boulevard in Oak Park. That's going to be a tough day for the mass celebrant, the Reverend Carl Morello, your favorite priest,
oh god.
pastor of St. Catherine, St. Lucie, and St. Giles, who made that March 2nd announcement from the pulpit.
So tough that he's invited Father James Martin and Father Flager to preach.
Quote, I do not look forward to it, Morello said of the final mass. In the original Tudor Gothic style St. Catherine's building that was completed in 1931.
Which is just a beautiful church.
It's
so
gorgeous.
trendy. Yeah, it's Gothic. It's beautiful.
Quote, in the short time I've been here the last 3 years, I've come to love the community, he said.
All four
There
of
is
them.
there is an intimacy there. And what's really sad to me, it's one of the best integrated communities of these 4 Oak Park parishes, which includes Ascension, St. Edmund, and St. Giles. Lower mass attendance and costly upkeep resulted in the fate of St. Catherine, St. Lucie, which was not targeted for closure by the Archdiocese of Chicago.
Why would it be?
Ins-
Because it's in a black area. They don't close a black area church. They
Instead-
close the white area neighborhood churches that are actually self-sufficient.
So listen to this. It's going to get worse, but
Mm.
the Arch didn't really play a role. Instead, following a town hall in October 2024, the parish determined that the cost of maintaining the church wasn't sustainable.
See, it shows
Parishioner
where
ma-
their priorities are, right?
Parishioner memories abound. It will also be a hard day for lifetime parishioner Christine Weedkind, but in some ways a beautiful day. She said she's aware of former parishioners from around the country, including one man from San Francisco, who will be at Sunday's service. Oh, the memories Weedkin has of the parish. She grew up in the Austin neighborhood and was essentially raised there. Her grandmother and parents were buried from St. Catherine. She received her sacraments there, went to school there, and got married there. Years ago, when Monsignor McGuire was the pastor of St. Catherine, if you were standing in the back of the church during Mass, he would find a right place for you to sit if he was back there. She said of the 1950s and Pastor Reverend Robert C. McGuire, you had to sit down. That's how crowded it would be in the 1950s.
Mhm.
She'll also be a lector at Sunday's final Mass. Valerie Jennings, who lives in Austin, has been a parishioner at St. Catherine, St. Lucie since the 1980s, and some of her best memories are, quote, just the wonderful liturgical ceremonies.
Oh boy, here it comes.
Quote, there is something to be said about a gathering of people who are joined to each other and singing and saying prayers, she said. It's still exciting.
No mention of Christ.
That's why she said that while Sunday won't be an easy day, it will still be a celebration. Recently, she buried her brother from the church. I was looking around and thinking, I'm going to miss this, she said. I had a moment to take it all in and release whatever kind of heaviness I had, and I know that things will be okay. As far as her next spiritual home, Weedkin said she is likely to find herself at St. Edmund, though she said the praise choir sings at St. Giles, so she will be there from time to time. As for Jennings, quote, we have a tri-parish, so I can float between any of them. Ministry to evolve, but the end is nigh, and there is work to be done to relegate the church. That will fall in large part on Morello's shoulders. He's already written the letter to Cardinal Blaise Supich that keeping St. Catherine, St. Lucie open was no longer sustainable. A decree was written to indicate the church will be relegated to a non-sacred space, which will occur the day after the final Mass. Are we just stuck with Supich?
Apparently, he's Leo's just gonna let him ride it out until he's dead, even though he should have been retired and relegated to, I don't know, some off Arctic island.
Then the Archdiocese Real Estate Office advises the church is available and will attempt to find a suitable renter or buyer. Morello said that while the Archdiocese could elect to sell the building, it may be more inclined to rent the space, considering that other facets of St. Catherine St. Lucy's ministry will continue on. St. Catherine St. Lucie Catholic School will remain open, while Sister House, which offers a temporary home to women seeking recovery from substance abuse, will remain in the church's former convent building.
Mm.
The Neighborhood Bridge and the Faith and Fellowship Ministry will continue to operate out of the repurposed rectory, along with Housing Forward and emergency overnight shelter. Libby Foster, Director of Communications for Housing Forward, said that the St. Catherine St. Lucie campus will remain a beacon of hope for many. For example, Housing Forward is partnering with the Neighborhood Bridge to convert the former rectory into a community resource hub, where both organizations will offer outreach to the surrounding communities.
What the hell does that mean?
Quote, it's not going to impact us operationally, but it's impactful from the standpoint of the deep legacy St. Catherine St. Lucie has in the community, added Prentice Butler, executive director of the Neighborhood Bridge. Basically, our organization and the legacy of this building has been community outreach.
Yeah, what? Just sell the freaking thing and build apartments.
As far as Sunday's final mass, Butler said, I think it will be sad. It will be more people wrestling with the memories of everything that has gone on. That includes Weedkind and many out-of-towners who will return to pay their respects. It should be a packed house, she said. Why couldn't it be packed every Sunday?
Because you're not engaged in worship of the one true God there. There's
So
your
that's the real frustrating part is I'm old enough to remember 2022 when we were talking about stories where restaurants had to shut down due
Mm.
to COVID.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Good. I know where you're going.
This is very similar.
Yeah.
The tone is the same.
Mm-hmm.
This is for the community. We had so many memories here. I'm really gonna miss it. The owner being Reverend Carl Morello in this case
Yes.
has to do something else.
Mm-hmm.
This is the exact same read.
Yes.
And that's why there's no more mass here.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right.
There's nothing here that goes beyond this world in this entire article.
Correct.
It's just people are coming in. It's going to be a good last time. I'm going to miss it.
Memories. Nothing
Yeah.
about theosis or transformation, right?
Or that we're on the offense and that the gates of hell will not prevail against it. The defensive structure, the
Mm-hmm.
gates,
Yes.
nothing like that.
Right.
Oh, that's so sad.
Yeah.
Anyways, thousands protest at Oak Park No Kings March.
I knew this was going to happen.
Oak Parkers protest Trump policies with large demonstration along Lake Street. Oh, wait.
Look at the diversity.
Oh, here's the Nicene Creed. Do you want to
Oh yeah,
in this
in
house
this house
in
we
this house
believe,
we
Black Lives
believe
Matter.
mhm,
Yeah.
science is real, love is love, kindness is everything.
Uh-huh.
Found it, waste, fraud. Oh, this is great.
Oh,
No
okay.
kings, no kings since 1776.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's cute.
This guy's got an N95 mask.
Oh my God.
Remember when that poor lady and the poor black lady in Austin, I forgot what the story was, but she was saying she said something about why couldn't we just I think it was the fasting for it might have been the fasting from whiteness and land, or maybe I'm just losing my mind and combining stories,
Uh-huh.
but where she said it would be nice if they could just, I don't know, donate money to some of
Yeah,
our
yeah.
organizations instead.
Uh-huh. Nope. They don't get satisfaction for virtue signaling enough for that. So
If there's money for a parade, there's money for Medicaid.
good one, buddy.
That guy's like 10.
Yeah.
Dump Trump, no kings in the USA.
Oh, she's fit.
First
All
they
these people,
came.
Let me tell you, these people are not away on their way, nor are they coming from the gym.
First, they came for immigrant families, and I did speak out because I am American. Is that the Statue of Liberty? That's a pretty cool painting,
Drawing.
actually.
Good for you.
No kings. If there's money for a parade, there's money for Medicaid. We have a constitution, not a king. American flag upside down. If your voice held no power, they would not try so hard to silence you.
Hmm.
Teens against Trump. Save science, as she's wearing a mask outside. Stop Trump. Thanks, Trump. You turned me into an activist.
Yeah.
Oh, Vicky Skaman.
Oh, there's Ricky Skaman. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, there's one black lady, and
Yes.
then these
It's
people are all
all
white.
lily white. I saw the little kid from the first one might be Mexican. They roped in a Venezuelan migrant from the Carlton Hotel to carry a sign. Poor kid.
Thousands gathered in downtown Oak Park Saturday, June 14th. These are the worst types of people, man. The worst types.
Hey,
Oh,
words can't describe.
the white guilt in Oak Park, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the fact that they could actually do something not too far away.
Yeah.
Imagine if all these people went to a homeless shelter or food shelter in Austin instead of complaining about Trump for the wrong reasons for
Yes.
this.
Right. Right.
Imagine if they did that instead.
Yes. I know.
That would actually do something. What does this do?
It doesn't do anything.
Thousands gathered in downtown Oak Park Saturday, June 14th to take part in Oak Park's No Kings protest of US President Donald Trump. The protest was part of a national series of demonstrations of the president on the day. As protest organizers said last week, they expected more than 1,800 protests associated with the No Kings movement to take place on Saturday.
They're all wigs. Good for them.
The
They
protest
all those intellects were just as elevated as John Calhoun and Daniel Webster, right?
The protest in Oak Park was one of several in Chicagoland on Saturday, the largest of which drew an estimated crowd of 20,000 to downtown Chicago's Daily Plaza. Other suburban communities like Geneva, Evanston, Arlington Heights, and Joliet also hosted No Kings protest.
Mm-hmm.
The protest was part of a national series of demonstrations opposing the president on the day. As protest organizers said last week, they expected more than 1,800 protests associated with the No Kings movement
They
to
said that
take place
already.
on Saturday. The crowd along Lake Street Saturday far eclipsed a similar anti-Trump protest in April. Attendees of the Oak Park protest said that fears over Trump policies aimed at ramping up deportations, slashing budgets to federal departments, and consolidating executive power drove them out to protest.
If only he was actually doing that.
Quote, there can't be kings and there can't be fascism, said Lori Sadowski, a longtime Oak Park resident who now lives in Grayslake. I don't recognize the United States right now at all. The nationwide No Kings protests were planned to go head to head with the large military parade planned for Saturday evening in Washington, D.C., celebrating both Trump and the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army. The Army birthday celebration had already been planned for months, but earlier this spring, Trump announced his intention to transform the event into a massive military parade, complete with 60-ton M1 Abrams battle tanks and Paladin self-propelled howitzers rolling through the city streets. I didn't know that.
You didn't know about the military parade? Yeah.
I didn't know he was going that hard.
Mm.
Oak Parker William F. Short attended the protest alongside his son Brendan and was seated in his wheelchair holding a neon yellow sign that proudly declared that he was a 100-year-old World War II veteran. Short said he felt like he had never lived under a president like Trump and that he was struggling to recognize the politics of the modern United States.
He doesn't know where he is. Plus, he fought under
Yeah, he fought in
FDR.
World War II.
Jeez. Actual concentration.
You didn't have to do that. You realize the politics at the time are the reason you had to be a World War II veteran.
Yes, exactly. Well said. Yeah.
He said he was appalled by the idea of Trump's military parade. Dude, you did a military parade.
Of course.
You did a military parade across an ocean.
Those damn
And then
people marching under the Arc de Triomphe after they liberated France.
and then it did not honor the sacrifices of his generation.
Because his generation's gone.
Oh gosh. We got a picture of him.
There he is.
Pro-democracy, anti-dictators.
Mm-hmm.
We fought for this country. It was a rough time. It reminds me of the Owen Benjamin. We're crushing it, or the boomer thing he does.
Yeah,
It was a rough time, and we lost a lot of people, but they didn't die. So a guy like this would take over their country, said Short.
Oh my
It
God.
it says we're not in World War II.
He thinks we still are.
It's as if we're not going to be a democracy anymore. When he gets through, you won't have a country anymore. Dude, you were this guy fought in a world war. You have people thinking in so many crazy ways. This is so far from where we're supposed to be. What? Okay, I'm not gonna even.
We can't have
I,
people thinking in their own ways.
I've beaten down the. I've beaten
Oh, get
down
out. Short's granddaughter is a freelance writer for Wednesday Journal. You see that?
Yeah, Short's granddaughter, Elizabeth Short, freelance writer.
And she had no part in whispering into Short's ear everything he was to say.
Did she write this? No.
No, shoot, that would have been great.
Fakai Seals, another Oak Park veteran who attended the protest with his young family, said it was his important for him. Okay. It's we can't go a week without.
Yeah.
Said it was his important to him to attend the protest show. Oh my gosh, this is an actual sentence. I'm gonna read it exactly how it is. Fakai Seals, another Oak Park veteran who attended the protest with his young family, said it was his important for him to attend the protest show his children to see the value of protest and patriotism going hand in hand. Ain't no way. Ain't no way.
That might be the best one yet. That might be the
Ain't-
most awkward, awful writing of the Wednesday Journal, and that's a high bar or a very low bar, they've said.
I want them to see democracy in action, and I want them to see the people speaking up, Seals said, holding a folded American flag in his hands. I'm a veteran, and I've seen other veterans out here representing and reclaiming the flag. The other side does not own the flag. They don't get to determine what this means. This means a lot to me. We want to stand for true freedom. It's not about a select few and the oligarchs.
Because
If we don't stand up to him, there will be nothing left.
oh,
Bro, these people kill babies. Can we
Right.
talk like can
Yeah,
we
yeah, yeah.
what are we talking about?
right. It's just they've constructed a false reality. It's another dimension they're living in.
The Oak Park protest comes months after another large anti-Trump protest in the village's downtown on April 5th. Although Saturday's demonstration drew a notably larger crowd with protesters marching down Lake Street and gathering in Scoville Park while chanting, waving flags, and displaying satirical signs. The sheer number of people, quote, the sheer number of people who showed up, having so many of these around the Chicago area, especially with the main one in downtown Chicago, I really didn't expect as large a gathering as was here today, said Kat, a 2-year Oak Park resident who wished not to have their last name printed.
Their last name.
I was absolutely blown away by how much of the community came out. Oak Park is one of the most liberal communities in the United States, with over 90% of Oak Parkers voting for Democrat Kamala Harris in the last presidential election. Traffic along Lake Street slowed to a crawl as cars honked their horns in approval, with a large Oak Park police presence on scene monitoring the march. Horn blows from an Oak Park fire engine rolling down the street drew a roaring cheer from the protesters. How much time did this one take?
Yeah.
The weekend's peaceful protests come on the heels of tense scenes playing out in Los Angeles as Trump ordered more than 2,000 National Guard troops and more than 700 U.S. Marines to intervene in immigration protests demonstrating against the administration's bid to maximize deportations. That move marked the first time in decades that the National Guard was deployed in a state without a governor requesting it. Susan Meyer of River Forest said she's worked in immigrant resettlement for more than 50 years and currently works with Friendship Community Place, a church on Chicago's Northwest Side. She said that she's recently worked with immigrants in Chicago, mostly women with multiple children, who she said were made to wear ankle monitors by immigration enforcement officers under false pretenses. Quote, it is frightening to hear their stories and to understand that we have government that is not taking care of the least among us. In fact, we have a government and a president who seems to be focused on hurting the most vulnerable among us, Meyer
They're
said.
illegal migrants. They're illegal immigrants. They are set for deportation. What is the why? I don't understand. I guess I understand the purpose of their protest is that they just want open borders. They don't want law enforcement. Okay, well then become an anarchist, become an anarcho-socialist, and call upon the government to be dissolved. What do you expect government to do except follow? I of course it's just selective and arbitrary when it's their guy in charge. It's all it really is wild to think. How many times do we have an episode where John Asnes's or Asnes's the myth of the rule of law is front and center?
Yeah. Oak Park, along with the neighboring Chicago and Berwyn, had recently been included on a federal list of immigration sanctuary cities the Trump administration said were actively violating immigration law. The list was pulled from the Department of Homeland Security's website days later, but had followed threats from federal agencies that cities like Oak Park, who have policies against cooperating with civil immigration enforcement investigations, would lose access to infrastructure support and other forms of federal funding. Village President Vicky Skaman officially responded to the village's inclusion on the list at June 3rd's village board meeting. Quote, I remain in constant contact with the governor's office and I'm grateful for their support. Our designated contact with the governor's office was the first person to call me Friday morning after the Thursday release of a presidential press release wrongly and irresponsibly calling out sanctuary city politicians, she said. Our ultimate goal is to build a stronger, more inclusive Oak Park and position our community to best serve and protect our residents. It is our engaged community, all of you, that makes us the leaders that we are and holds us accountable to never rest. I will never rest. That's the segment.
That's it.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
What would have happened if I'd gone for it and just said, no, I'm gay? Father Tom, get the incense.
Yeah, right. It is exhausting. It's exhausting to keep up with this insane asylum, right?
Yeah. Anyways, anything else to promote?
Not much. Got t-shirts and stuff on hotwaterhistory.com. Oh, we forgot to mention the audiobook.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So we have the people have pined for over the years that we're coming up on very close,
3
just in a
years.
couple weeks, 3 years since the publication of our groundbreaking, revolutionary, and ultimately incontrovertibly enlightening twisted history of the United States. And we had people have over the course of the years, I guess people don't like reading anymore, but hey, whatever. I know people are spending a lot of time in cars and listening to podcasts and audiobooks. Well, finally, we have available on Amazon for the low price of $11.99. You're going to save a lot of money than getting the print book, which we yet encourage you to do, especially the hardcover, which is beautiful. But you can get a Twisted History of the United States audiobook version. And I've listened. It's really well done, I think. And it captures much of the mood and the sense. I mean, when I was compiling or getting the audiobook published for everyone's pleasure or to make it available, I did again read through and listen to the epilogue, which is just talk about hammering stuff home. Oh my gosh, it's just so well written and well just argued, and I think it's just beautiful and eloquent prose. So I hope people like it.
All right, everyone. God
Thank you,
bless.
Charlie. God bless everyone. Thank you. See you next time. Peace.
Peace.